Hey you, I'm Andy Powell. Welcome to the Allcast Podcast. No topic is off the table. I hope you enjoy. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
How you
Thank you for
doing?
having me, Andy.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for doing this. So we got a lot of stuff we could talk about with psychedelics. I know that you're more in the ayahuasca arena than other stuff, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
That's still the case.
Yep.
So I guess starting off, how did you get into the world of psychedelics at all?
Sure. Well, I started really kind of opening the door to more. I started more through studying of shamanism and really kind of exploring a personal shamanic practice well before I got too involved with any sort of psychedelics or entheogens. It was probably my mid to late teens. I was first kind of made aware of the practice of shamanism, and shamanism being a kind of like the original spiritual practice. You follow our ancestors all the way back, and the shamanic practices that existed in all these different cultures and all of these different traditions predate so many of these what we consider to be religious or spiritual practices, and really is the baseline, the foundation of so many of the religious and spiritual practices that we come to know today. And so it was in my late teens where I first started to explore shamanism, and this is, mid-late 90s. So there wasn't a whole lot in terms of resources. There's no Wikipedia. There were no YouTube videos or how-tos or anything like that. So it's mostly just kind of a scavenger hunt of my own to kind of understand and really begin to kind of put a framework together for me to explore spirituality and a connection to something greater through the practices that were, and the clues and the threads that had been left by our ancestors all the way up into modern times. It was really, reading Carlos Castaneda that kind of first put the idea on the map for me, and then being exposed to the concepts and the ideas of shamanism started with the works of authors like Michael Harner and Sandra Ingerman and David Wasserman, some of the primary sources for modern contemporary shamanic practices. But it was really just a kind of a isolated and very solitary exploration. Didn't really have any teachers or mentors that I was studying with. And it was just a lot of my own practice. It was kind of focused primarily around shamanic journeying in various forms of sound meditation, or drummings, flutes, rattles, that type of thing, as well as dream work, and really starting to explore the practice of dream work, dream tending, and that was basically my entire practice up until my early 30s. Through my 20s, and at different places it was kind of off again, on again, but for the most part it was shamanic journeying, dream work, and lots of reading, and that was it. Lots of time on the land, out in nature.
So nearly 2 decades without being in an altered state of consciousness via an outside source like a drug.
Yeah, any sort of entheogen
plant, yeah.
I mean, there was, of course, it was more recreational than it was spiritual.
Dabbling.
But in terms of a kind of mindful, intentional, relational approach to entheogens and plant medicines or any sort of altered state, it was a good 15, 17 years before I had been aware and made aware of ayahuasca just through some of my studies and conversations with others. And by that time I had, I moved around a bit and ended up in Charleston, South Carolina, where I was really kind of welcomed into this really lovely community there of seekers and practitioners, and was given the opportunity to start offering some lectures and workshops and classes on these practices that I had been doing on my own for, 10, 15 years.
And these are just shamanic practices. These are not, this is only like sound meditation.
Mm-hmm.
He mentioned that one.
Yep.
What are a couple other examples of shamanic practice with oneself.
Yeah, so the shamanic journeying, which is, I like to describe it as shamanic journeying is it's a form of meditation where it kind of sits on the opposite end of the spectrum from what we traditionally consider meditation. A meditative practice where you kind of quiet the mind, get behind the thoughts, or, watch the thoughts pass, really achieve some sort of inner silence, inner peace. Shamanic journeying is a form of meditation on the other end. You are truly engaging your imagination. You are leaning into your own imaginative capacity from the perspective that our imagination is not make-believe. We're not just daydreaming. We're not making it up. Our imagination is truly that which connects us to the spiritual realm. It's the thread. It is the lens through which that which is beyond description can then interact with us, and we can interact with that. Through our imagination and our imaginative capacity, really open up the doors to these altered states purely from a sober, grounded place. So shamanic journeying is a practice within which we utilize and harness and collaborate with our imagination in order to connect to that spiritual, that shamanic dimension.
And would something like holotropic breathwork be a part of that active, engaging shamanic practice, or would you consider that to be a different form of practice?
Yeah, I think they all, any approach in which we are altering our ordinary perception can be an avenue towards a shamanic experience. In the shamanic drumming or the shamanic sound meditation, we're using sound in order to alter that consciousness.
So it's taking your focus, your attention itself, and putting it on one recurring thing, like the drumming.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that recurring thing, is it self-hypnosis that allows you to go up and out into your imaginative space? Or in?
Yeah, directions start to lose meaning once we travel a little further outside of this dimension. But I think it's along those lines, right? It is, there's all kinds of research that's available now demonstrating that simply listening to a steady, monotonous drum beat alters our brainwaves. It puts us into that more hypnotic, hypnagogic state where we are more open, more receptive to kind of those extrasensory experiences. And I think what an important aspect of that, and this is kind of a real core principle to any shamanic practice, is the intention within which you are doing this. So, it's one thing to kind of listen to binaural beats and have your experience. And it's a kind of listen to that and let yourself kind of go.
Mm-hmm.
That's
like a non-participatory meditative practice.
Yeah, I would say it's a practice or an approach where it is more about kind of the release of intention or conscious participation, which can be very effective. That's certainly an avenue. In my experience and in my practice, kind of the shamanic journeying approach is one where it is the intention within which that is what's driving or guiding the experience. Like, why am I doing this at this time? If this is part of my shamanic practice, and in my shamanic practice, what I'm trying to do is to forge and nourish and strengthen a connection and relationship with the unseen, with that which is greater than myself, with the ground beneath my feet, with my ancestors around me for teaching, wisdom, healing, guidance, support, then I'm going to want to engage in that experience really intentionally, So whether it be through, drumming, you mentioned holotropic breath work, that is something where, again, we're using some technique, some avenue to activate and alter our sense of normal reality and our normal consciousness in this reality, trying to do something to tweak that just enough to open up a different doorway, a different path, like you said, either that way out or in.
Which is what all music is essentially doing, right?
True. Yeah. I mean, that is a shamanic experience at any given level. That we're truly letting that experience open up our capacity to perceive in a different way. And I think it is in that space where we're perceiving things a little bit differently, or maybe really differently. That is what opens up opportunities for a greater understanding, for new ideas, for inspiration, for the sacred, for something greater than ourselves to come on through, whether it be music, body movement, art, all of these different activities and these different techniques kind of boil it all down to its most essential element. And my belief is that that's what the experience is trying to create, the opportunity for the door of perception to open just a little differently. And that, practiced over time with discipline, with devotion, with a little bit of discernment and boundaries, consistency, we begin to develop a path, a practice. And that is what can allow us to kind of, they talk a lot about a shaman or a shamanic practitioner is one with a foot in both worlds.
Yeah.
And that's how I see it. Mm-hmm. It is not entirely meant for escapism. And I want to go into these altered realms and never come back because, there's plenty of good reason. But it's how do I bring that experience to live a more full, a more integrated, a more whole life here now in this present moment, in this body, in this place.
So kind of the purpose of a shamanic personal practice would be in pursuit of God, or what people call God, in pursuit of that thing that's greater than us, the divine, the spirit,
mm-hmm.
And also to live a better life based on that connectivity.
I think it's the connectivity piece. That really is a personal shamanic practice, is one that can lead to greater connectivity, greater relationship with a creator, with God, with the earth beneath you, with your ancestors, with your family, with yourself.
So it's training connectivity to everything in your experience.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Okay. Awesome. We've answered like half my questions already. That's so
well,
funny.
We got time.
Yeah, definitely. So for you personally, when you first started doing these shamanic journeys before any of the plant medicine stuff, how did you see it affect your life?
Well, the first thing was really, it was a response to what called me to explore shamanism in the first place. And that was, even as a child, I was acutely aware that there was a big gaping hole in my being. This emptiness, this feeling of there's something missing. And I didn't have the language or the context or even an inclination of where to go to have this hole be filled. And it was a spiritual longing. As I look back now at 12, I didn't know that was what it was. But looking back, it was that cry for spiritual connection and having no real viable option available. I was never really that drawn to what was offered as any sort of organized religious experience and what we have available to us in Western culture. I wasn't a complete and total hipster about it and being like, oh, it's all phony or whatever. It was just like, it's not doing it. There's something missing.
Yeah. It didn't answer all your questions, or it didn't fill that gap
right
sufficiently,
mm-hmm.
things like that.
And I didn't have, there wasn't a bridge available to me at that time to connect this idea or the recognition that there's something missing to where I was experiencing connection at a very deep soul level, which was in nature as a kid, like all of us, mm-hmm. Go out into the woods, you're just like, this place is magic, Name all the trees. I know that robin over there. This is my favorite plant. Whatever it is, it was just, that's how I thought it just was meant to be. That nature is this magical place full of magic. And I didn't have the awareness that that's a spiritual experience. That is engaging in a connection into something greater. And so There was nothing to really put those two pieces together. Longing for a spiritual experience, this real present connection I'm having to the world around me in these places in nature is a spiritual experience. Disconnected. Being exposed to shamanism and these ancestral shamanic practices, these ancestral shamanic beliefs and perspectives where that was it. It is this personal relationship that one is having with the world around them, the ground beneath them, the community they're in, the source of something greater. That personal relationship, that's a spiritual experience. So, to begin to explore that idea, what is it like? I remember one of the first exercises I started doing, and this was from one of Sandra Ingerman. She's a really well-respected, well-known practitioner of core shamanic practices. She's written tons of books. She's really just such a wisdom keeper of some of these practices. And it was just an idea that was really gleaned from some of her writings, was to go out in nature and find the tree that seems to call to you, or where you may already have one. You might already got a favorite tree out there. Just go spend time with that tree, sit under that tree, do some, sing to that tree, play your drum to that tree. And it was just things that I had never really considered as doing something other than just like a novelty, or just felt right. But to go there, again, with intention. Be intentional about connecting to this being that's right here in front of you.
So in that instance, the intention is connection with that thing.
Right.
Rather than some overarching intention.
Yeah, it can be as simple and direct as that. I'm not journeying to find the meaning of life.
Right.
I'm journeying to be present with this being and engage in a relationship like I'm sitting here with you. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Be open to responses that can come in many different ways. And what had happened in that experience is, I had kind of learned this very basic technique for shamanic journeying. Shamanic journeying in a lot of ways, and ways that I really am connected to, involves a lot of creative visualization and using your mind's eye to allow scenery, imagery to come forward. And so use this technique. And there was always, even to this day, there's still a little bit of doubt where it's like, am I just making this up? Am I just like creating this to happen? That's just part of the deal. But back then, it was a really, really, really tough hurdle for me to get over. To really just kind of let myself go and say, so what if I'm making this up? Let's see what else I can make up. But I was really just kind of hamstrung to this, like an image would come forward. I'd be, playing the drum or listening to the drum beat and following some of the steps, and then, okay, I'm just going to allow things to come forward. But everything that came, I was like, I'm making that up. It was really just, it was tough.
Yeah.
But in
what age was that?
This was 17,
Yeah.
18 years old. Yeah. And
it's silly because everything that exists, all inventions, are things that got made up.
Exactly. Where else is it going to happen?
Yeah.
Like this is all in my head. Yeah. Where else would it be?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the experience. But in that moment, and my intention for this journey was I wanted to go and meet the spirit of this tree, of this particular tree. Show me yourself. Please show me yourself in a way that I can engage with. And that was the intention. And then it came through the journey. There was this experience that happened where I was like, there's no way I could have made that up. You give me 11,000 lifetimes, I would have never have thought that.
Strong experience. Then.
Strong experience.
So what gave you the notion initially that the tree had a spirit that you could connect with?
Well, that's kind of the animistic idea in so many of these shamanic practices, is that consciousness is not relegated only to us. It's just different. And it's different in this particular expression of existence. Flesh and blood and bone, bark and sap and root. Different,
But there's still a locality of awareness in that thing.
Right.
Even if it's being perceived differently.
Correct.
Okay.
There's a consciousness. There's a personality. And that is, anyone who owns a pet knows that we're not the only beings with consciousness, you know? And so that extends as well to the plant kingdom, to the mineral kingdom, to kingdoms that we don't even know about. And so, you know, kind of, at least in my approach to the shamanic practice, it is the relationship, and it is relationship building. And so this has been a tree that was in the woods behind my house growing up, that for some reason, for as long as I can remember, there was just something about that tree. Man, it really just sung to me, you know, and I was drawn to that tree ever since I was a little kid. And then this opportunity was presented. This idea came forward through my kind of early studies and early practices of going and connecting to these beings in nature that you feel drawn to. I was like, oh, that's the one. And so, and I did this shamanic journey while sitting at the base of this big giant tree, where I can say confidently, and I could say confidently in that moment too, like, that's this tree, that's this consciousness. It is separate from me, but also we're connected. And that's the, like we were saying, that connection is kind of at the root of the personal shamanic practice of, I would say, any spiritual experience is the experience of connection. And then the practice is creating a relationship through that connection. Experience the connection, and then experience the relationship that's existing between this conscious being and this conscious being, that tree and my soul, you know, the heavens above and the earth below. Where is the connection, and how can that connection be related to and experienced through relationship?
Very well said. Very well said. That, I might be jumping ahead here, but that begs the question of all the different things that could be connected to. And I know in the at least in the psychedelic world or the New Age community, a lot of people talk about duality and about it's not really good and evil. It's just two opposites of the same plane, of something along those lines. So even though we're jumping ahead, my question is, in your experience, have you experienced things that would be negative or evil or carry that tone in them? And just to say that those types of things could be connected to or connected with as well, if somebody so chose.
Well, yeah. I mean, as above, so below. And if I use this example of, like, you and I are sitting here having a conversation and we're developing a relationship, there's existing here a sense of trust, a sense of community here. You know, you've welcomed me into your home. Okay, we have a bit of rapport. And so there's an opening of relationship that's available here. I know plenty of people that I wouldn't want to go sit across from them and have a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that there isn't, that, you know, we're all one and consciousness is one and duality and all this. I think the important thing to keep in mind is that in so many ways, the exploration of the spiritual dimension is very similar to this dimension. And there are plenty of things out there that I wouldn't really care to relate to. Areas of town that I don't feel safe to go to.
Right.
You know? And that's not a value judgment. That's discernment. Yep. And that's a bit of respect for my own boundaries. And I think that we can get into it at one point or another, but I think it can be a very naive and potentially dangerous approach for anyone to go into the spiritual experience or into a ceremony working with entheogens with the perspective of we're all one. And it's all, you know, once you kind of get into that realm, it's all love and light. You know?
Right, because with that mentality, if you're carrying that mental state into a psychedelic space, and you're opening yourself up from a certain framework that allows for anything to be a part of you and you to be a part of anything, which ultimately, when you come back to normal baseline, that's not what you want.
Right. I think that's where, to circle back to something we've talked about a little bit already, it's the intention. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know? And I think the clear one can tap into their purpose, their why.
Yeah.
whether it's for their lifetime or this one little scenario, the more clear that a person is connected to their purpose and their intention, the more consciousness, the more discernment, the clearer the boundaries, the clearer the communication that will be available. If someone goes in just because why not, or I just want to experience ego death, or I just want to transcend. It's like, okay, it sounds great. It sounds wonderful. Blessings. And you better get real clear on what you're doing, because that can lead you into some really tricky places.
Yeah. So the experiences you might hear about where people come back from these psychedelic journeys and they have some lingering issue, would you say that that's generally a result of the initial intent or mindset?
I would say, well, it kind of depends. I mean, some people come back because the work isn't done. It is a process. And if an experience happens in the ceremony that opens up some things, awakens some new awareness, or maybe some hard to swallow truths about, decisions they've made, or see some parts of yourself that you're not too comfortable with, I mean, you're going to come back on that Sunday after a weekend or after a retreat and be a little untethered. Your foundation is going to be a little rocky. That can lead to feeling a little destabilized after a powerful ceremonial experience. And that doesn't have to be just with entheogens. That can be breath work. It can be, a really deep conversation with a good friend or a family member, So I don't think it is 100% evidence that something bad happened.
No, well, more like a faulty intent. I mean, how often have you seen somebody go in with like, oh, I want to see ego death, and then come out on the other side of that with like, oh, that kind of messed them up or something because they had an unclear intent.
Sure. Yeah. I've definitely seen that, and I've had my own experiences of not going in with a really clear idea. And I think it's also, a way that a person can mitigate that type of experience is it's helpful to have the perspective that the ceremony is not just the couple days or the however many hours in that altered state. The ceremony, I always like the old saying, the ceremony begins when you make the commitment to go to ceremony, whatever it is. Like, that's when the ceremony starts. Not just, if it's a weekend retreat somewhere, you get there Friday, then it starts. No, it began long before.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. It's going to continue to unfold long after you leave that retreat space or you leave that ceremonial container. Now, if I kind of maintain that perspective, then I'm allowing a whole lot more room for that experience. So if my intention is, say, and it has been, my intention is I just want to get past the ego, all right, so I go into the ceremony and maybe instead of seeing God's brilliant face patting me on the head saying I'm his favorite son, instead I see a whole bunch of uncomfortable truths about myself, or I'm just really irritated and angry at everybody else in the room all weekend. Well, if my perspective is that the ceremony ends on Sunday, then I'm going to be pretty upset. I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to be angry because it's like, I wanted ego death, and all I got was my own ego for 3 days. My perspective is like this, whatever happens in that retreat or in that experience is simply chapter 17, 18, 19 of a much longer story. Okay, there's more room, there's more space, there's more time available to explore that experience. And I think if I'm extra prepared and I'm employing all of my consciousness to go experiencing this, I'm going to make sure that I have support. I'm going to have people that I can work with, I can bounce ideas off of, ask to kind of hold that space of reflection and contemplation with me to help me integrate the experience, help me prepare for the experience. And so kind of taking the long way around town to get to your original question about is it something with a warped intention, or maybe the intention wasn't clear, yeah, it can be that. And I think one thing to help support and create a clear intention is these things that we're talking about. Expanding the scope of the experience, really welcoming in support and help from all different spaces. And you kind of extend that perspective far enough. Ceremony begins the moment you commit to partaking in the ceremony, and it's going to extend past the ceremony. Well, can stretch that out to its logical conclusion. This is all ceremony. The ceremony is always going.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting perspective, and I appreciate that one a lot. And I kind of get that. And it reminds me of something that Dennis McKenna has said. It's, once you get the message, hang up the phone.
Yeah.
Because you can do all that stuff that you're doing in there. You can do it out here too, more or less, maybe with less visuals or maybe a slightly more dull sensitivity.
Sure.
On your different senses. But what's been the most effective thing that you have found outside of psychedelics to achieve those same results?
Help me understand a bit more. When you say, what do you mean by results?
Oh, good question. The connectivity to the world around you and to what you believe God to be, or the higher power, whatever that is for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is kind of in reference to the quote from Dennis who just said, it's one thing to get the message. It's one thing to get it. Oh, this is what this means. Oh, I see how these pieces come together. But it doesn't end there.
Right.
The next step is to employ that into your life. If I have a ceremony where it's like, wow, you know what? I'll kind of keep it simple. Oh man, I'm just spending way too much time on the screens.
Yeah.
And I have that really clear feeling, yep, this is a truth for me. I'm spending way too much time on my phone. In the moment, that's like, whoa, that can be like an aha, like really deep felt core of my being truth. And then, ceremony comes to an end, candles are lit, have some food. All right, now we're kind of back into the normal waking consciousness. I may not have the same level of oomph when I go to, journal that at the end of the weekend, or really reflect, oh yeah, I really got that message loud and clear, spending too much time on the phone. The potency of that is only as strong as my willingness and commitment to nurture that. I work with plant medicine, so I use a lot of gardening analogies. Plants look great when they're in this nice vase on your table. You just cut the stems, put that weird little powder in there, some water, beautiful, buds blooming. It's such a beautiful thing. But after a couple weeks, they start to wilt. Plants aren't meant to be in a vase on the table. They're meant to be outside. But gardening is hard work. It is work. You have to be disciplined. You have to be consistent. And so, if I have that really big aha moment, it is then up to me to nurture and nourish and take care of that and actually do the things that I'm being shown or demonstrated or awakened to in the ceremony. So, to answer your question, like those really strong experiences that achieve the same kind of result as they do under the, entheogenic experience or in that altered state, are when in my regular day-to-day life, I'm actually living in and really have integrated and am utilizing the awarenesses that I'm granted in those ceremonies and seeing the change and actually seeing the result. Yeah, this actually makes a difference. One of the most powerful experiences.
So real quick, could it be phrased that it's the action of employing your willpower?
Yeah, it's making the ceremony a part of your life. Really taking the experience and planting it, rooting it deeply
Yeah.
into your day-to-day. It's like you said, that quote, when you get the message, hang up the phone.
Yeah.
There were plenty of times along my journey with plant medicine where I got the message, didn't do much with it, went back to ceremony, got the same message. Okay, this time didn't do anything, and then round and round I went, and it's the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And I experienced that, and I've seen that in others as well. It's the ceremony is less about deeper connection to self and more about escape from self.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've seen that a lot.
And that's where the real discipline, chopping wood and carrying water, that comes from these experiences, that's really what makes the relationship, getting back to the idea of connection and relationship. If I allow it to exist only on weekends or when I go to the jungle for a couple months at a time, if that's the only time that I'm engaged with this consciousness, with these experiences, it's about as far as I'm going to get. It's going to be really powerful every couple weekends or a few months out of the year.
Yeah.
If I bring it in, and this is where part of it is that relationship to the sacred. In the tradition that I've done the majority of my studying in the ayahuasca traditions of the Shipibo, these plants, ayahuasca, the master plants, these trees, these flowers, they have a consciousness and a personality unique and unto themselves. And through the tradition and some of these traditional practices, the development of a relationship to not just ayahuasca, but to Ayuma, to Tamamuri, to Piña Blanco, to some of these other master plant teachers, it's a relationship. These are beings in my life.
Yeah, there's a couple of parallels I'd like to make. You mentioned you go to the jungle for a couple months and then don't really root that stuff in for the rest of the year. I grew up in church, so oftentimes we would hear people say, you can't just go to church on Sundays and be a Christian on Sundays, and then the rest of the week you're doing whatever. You gotta root that in throughout the week. That's why you read your Bible every day and all that.
Sure.
And then kind of like you just said, as far as developing a relationship with these plants, I don't know, I haven't done a traditional dieta like what you're referring to, but my first thought went to coffee. Coffee's a plant. People suck that stuff down all day, every day,
sure,
myself included. So you have a relationship with that plant. And generally, I don't know, my perspective on coffee is that most people don't have a healthy relationship with it.
Yeah.
But with these plants that you're talking about, what's that relationship kind of like as far as doing a dieta, and what's the purpose of building that relationship with some of these plants?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think it's very multifaceted. So, and I'm speaking entirely from my experience as a non-indigenous Shipibo, having only been exposed to just the teeniest part of the outer edge of this ancient tradition and culture. But the way that I've stepped into it through the help of many, many wonderful teachers and guides and maestros and maestras is to first, kind of beginning with this perspective that these are conscious beings. Ayahuasca is an entire universe of experience unto herself. And within that experience, there's opportunities not just for the psychedelic experience. There's opportunities for healing, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. There's opportunities for greater understanding of self, allowing for kind of to take a look at parts of oneself from, like we said earlier, just that different perspective, creak the door open in a little different way and get a little better understanding, create an avenue for some forgiveness, for some compassion, for all these things. And that it's a road to get there. You're going to have to work through some other feelings before you get to that final, all is wonderful, gratitude, thank you for my life. But ayahuasca doesn't cure. She creates an opportunity for one to heal themselves. And so these master plants in the Shipibo tradition, to the extent that I've experienced it, Ayahuasca I see as kind of like a general practitioner, and is really kind of the table setting, or the table upon which a lot of these other experiences can be set. These master plants are like the specialists. And through their unique personalities and their unique medicines and their unique consciousness, allow for the individual, for the practitioner, for the dieter to go in and engage with this consciousness in a unique way that allows for, another level of understanding or relationship or connection. So just kind of give a really small example of my own. So one of the components of a traditional Shipibo dieta, well, there's several. One is solitude, isolation. It's really important for the individual to get a lot of space from the noise and the distraction and the inputs that we're constantly getting bombarded with. So, one of the traditional ways is you sit out in the jungle, you get yourself a nice little space all to yourself, and you really lean deep into that experience of peace and quiet and solitude. Another really key component is the diet. What am I putting into my body? What am I fueling my body with? So much of what is available to us, aside from just general Western diet, which isn't the best, but there's a lot of energy. These fruits, the vegetables, red meat, pork, all of these things. It's very, very taxing to our physical body in different ways. And so when one is on a plant diet, and the intention is to make a connection to the consciousness, the energy of this particular tree or flower, we're going to want to make our physical body as chilled out, as open, as receptive, as dialed down as much as possible, because we're trying to bring this energy in. If I'm all amped up on coffee and this and that, I'm not really, it's like if I want to plant a rose bush in my yard, I'm not going to use Dr. Pepper and Taco Bell to fertilize the soil.
Great example.
Yeah. And so these are just some of the different perspectives to creating that container of the diet. Solitude, really intentional care of the physical body, really intentional discernment within which I'm utilizing my consciousness, my thinking, my mind, my thoughts. Am I going to be listening to podcasts and watching TV when I'm trying to be quiet and dialed down and opened to receiving and engaging with this consciousness? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and then in that space, when we take the time to kind of remove a lot of these distractions, a lot of this noise from our life, it doesn't take long for one to see how useful those distractions have been, because they are distractions.
Useful at distracting?
Correct.
Yeah.
And speaking for myself, I use a lot of those things to divert my attention away from some of the important stuff within me that's trying to come up and get my attention. Unaddressed, unresolved emotional states, core memories, traumas, whatever it is. Also, it doesn't always have to be like the heavy duty healing. It can also be opportunities for creativity. If I'm really inspired to go do something, but I kind of have a block around that, or I'm not feeling too confident, or I don't even know where to begin, well, I certainly know how to go scroll the internet or go do these things that can be very easily distracting. So, this is the framework that the diet provides. Going to give you some space from a lot of these things that distract you. We're going to really dial down so much of the inputs that are coming into your bodies, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. And we're going to engage in a connection to this consciousness, this plant, which has, through this tradition, through the Shipibo tradition, a number of different healing and supportive qualities unique unto themselves. This plant, this tree, whatever it is, through their tradition, it's like this tree can help you with addiction. This tree can help with, physical trauma, whatever.
And I think it's really important to say that all medicines, almost all medicines that we have, including the pharmaceutical ones, come from plants originally. So it's not a far, what you're saying is not a far reach for anybody who might think that, oh, this sounds weird, a plant to help you with addiction. No, it's it's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
The other thing, oh man, I don't remember. Keep on rolling.
Okay. Well, I think the question was, what is the experience of the diet? What is that like, right?
Oh, I remember.
Okay.
Thank you.
There we go.
So, like you were saying, you're taking out some of those inputs. So I think of it like an audio interface, or like something where you have dials. You can turn the volume down, you can turn the bass up, stuff like that. So if it's your own life and you're looking at a control board of your own life, you have the dial that's screen time. You can turn that dial down.
Yeah.
And you pick all of these dials that are your distracting things, and you start to turn all those down just through your choice, through your intention. And as a byproduct of that, the other dials turn up automatically. They get louder as a byproduct of turning those dials down. So it increases your potential extrasensory perception, or your ability to empathize and feel what another person is feeling when you're in the same room as them. Things like that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's something about the experience of, and it's so prevalent in so many other wisdom traditions and spiritual traditions, where discomfort can be an incredible tool for self-change. Putting ourselves in a little bit or a lot of discomfort, getting out of the comfort zone, is a really effective way to recalibrate.
That's why they do boot camp the way they do it.
That's why. I mean, think of all these different experiences now that people feel drawn to. I mean, holotropic breathing.
Ice baths. Yeah, discomfort.
It's all hot, cold. Vision Quest is, one of the, and there's so many traditions, both ancestrally and more contemporarily, of going out into nature as bare bones and raw as possible, not glamping, but to really go out and engage in nature in a way that pushes you to that edge. That is where the transformation is most available. It's not guaranteed, but it's more available the closer we get ourselves to that point of really stepping out of the comfort zone. I've got a really close friend and brother in the medicine who's an engineer by trade. He gave me this really good example this one time. He talked about the process of friction. And, two pieces of metal rubbing together creates this heat. And that heat is the catalyst for change. And it's the friction that creates the heat, right? And so when we put ourselves in these extreme conditions, and, make no mistake, going down to the jungle and sitting in a tree house in the jungle, and you got all the, the snakes and the bugs and the bad food and all these things, that's going to create some friction against those kind of soft and squishy parts that we have. That's really going to put you to a place where you can see. That's an altered state that a person can achieve. Fasting is one we didn't mention. Fasting, that's another,
I
really,
love fasting.
Right? And that's, it is an intentional approach to achieving an altered state.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's getting back to the diets and working with these plants. So there I am in my diet. I'm in isolation. I've removed a lot of my, soothing mechanisms and distractions. And without those available, I'm experiencing some friction internally. Perhaps I'm, seeing some things about myself, or coming to some new awareness on certain situations in my life, or beliefs or patterns, and it's uncomfortable, and of course, as I said before, intention. Why am I doing this right now? Why am I experiencing this diet with this plant. Okay, so that's kind of orienting me in a direction to be available to what's coming up. And there they are. Now I'm starting to see these parts of self, or coming to these awarenesses that weren't available to me before. And this is where the relationship becomes available with this other consciousness. Because it's not just me alone in the jungle suffering. It's me connecting to the consciousness of this tree, of this plant, of making myself available to something greater than myself.
And in this instance, it's through consumption. You're eating the plant. That's correct?
Yeah. There's some, some plants they make into a tea, some, eating the roots or the bark, whatever it may be.
But
Teas.
all of the dieta is some sort of actual physical interface with the plant, whether it's eating or drinking, rather than what we talked about initially, which is drumming with the intent of connecting.
Correct. Yeah. So there's different practices or different traditions with these different plants. But yes, there is a physical bridge, somehow ingesting the plant in some way. And then, deeper into the Shipibo tradition, not so much deeper, but in addition to the individual experience, ideally, you're working with a trained shaman, a trained curandero or curandera in the tradition. That individual, that shaman, has their own relationship to this plant. And so they are facilitating the connection through their own relationship with the plant, their knowledge of the medicine, their connection to ayahuasca and the Shipibo tradition. So it truly is a collaborative experience.
Yeah, it's like introducing you to your friend. Like, hey, Ben, this is Shane. Shane, this is Ben.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. And so that's what's available. And it's not a magic cure. Oh, I'm addicted. I'm going to go diet, and I come away, I'm free and clear.
Sorry to interrupt again. That's the thing, though, is that oftentimes people think that that's the case, and they think it's a magic button where you don't have to work for it.
Right.
You go and you eat something, and then it's done. And it's not the case.
I haven't seen too many examples of that being the case. I think it's primarily, people can be drawn for different reasons. We all got to start somewhere, and I think there's the opportunity available for someone who, for whatever reason, maybe that their intention, their calling, their draw to go experience psychedelics is not to go deep dive into their most deepest, darkest traumas, or have all of their worst things come to light so that they can integrate those experiences and have a emotional breakthrough with it. Maybe some people just want to have the experience. Maybe there's the opportunity for some who just haven't experienced an altered state before, and there's a curiosity there. There's an openness and willingness for a new experience.
Yeah.
That's totally available and reasonable. And I think but let's just be honest with ourselves about it. If my intention is, I'm seeing a lot of these, Instagram influencers going down to Costa Rica, talking all bunch of stuff about these cool psychedelics, and I want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. If that is the intention, just be honest about it.
Yeah.
If you really like the idea of someone calling you a shaman, and you just want to learn, just show me how to do it. Hey, okay, just be honest about it.
Yeah.
And then from that place of honesty, then be available. Maybe something comes up through you. Maybe there's something that's more open for you to explore. And I think that's kind of getting back to the idea of intention. Let's just be honest to the best of our ability. There's going to be things that come up that no one can prepare for. But at least for this next step that I'm taking, it's best to be as honest as I can with myself as to why I'm doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, along those lines, in the effort of transparency, is whether or not you support or would recommend or whatever anything regarding psychedelics. I'm currently in a place where I don't think I'm going to recommend this to anybody right now, but I've had my experiences and they got me to where I'm at, which were extremely valuable.
Yeah.
So I know that in order to find the truth, you have to look for it. And that was one of my roads that I went down to get to where I'm at. So people are going to do it regardless. So I think it's super important to kind of go over the things that you should look out for. If you do see something on that's Instagram ad that's like, hey, come down to Costa Rica and we'll do this or that for you. And there's a lot of claims of healing, which can be very dangerous. So some more questions for you would be like, well, how do you pick where you're going to go if you do decide to do this?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one would be just kind of reiterate what we were just talking about. Number one is just to get real clear and honest about why it is this person is feeling called. They see something, maybe they hear a story from somebody they hear on a podcast, or maybe a friend or family member had a big experience, and they're like, okay, I'm curious. I want to explore that. First things first is to kind of get a real good idea for yourself why you're feeling called. And you don't have to figure it out, but at least get some direction towards it. And it could be one of the things we just mentioned. Number one, I'm looking to have the experience. This sounds really novel and kind of exciting, or whatever it is. And I'm interested in having that experience. Another could be perhaps that there is some true healing that is being sought. Mental, emotional, physical, spiritual healing, kind of what we said at the very beginning. Perhaps that person really feels that emptiness, or a sense of being lost or directionless or depressed, whatever it is.
Addiction's another important one.
Sure, there's something in life is out of balance.
Yeah,
something isn't. It's not calibrated, and it is affecting the quality of life. And I'm looking for help. Okay, that's another incredibly valid and common direction to go towards. And maybe a person is wanting to go down because they are looking to, deepen their own spiritual connection. Perhaps this is something that a person wants to go and work with plant medicines as a way to facilitate greater spiritual aliveness, or a spiritual experience in their own life. And these aren't all mutually exclusive. These can have all three, whatever it is. And there's others. But to get a good idea of like why am I feeling called at this time? Because that's going to go a long way in helping that individual know what questions to ask, know what to kind of look out for and be aware of in terms of what they're looking for in a center. Because if you're going to go down to Costa Rica or to Peru, or if you're going to go somewhere else, there's a whole spectrum of places that are available, from the super fancy, posh, high-end down to the real rustic, old school. You're going to be picking spiders off your bed before you go to sleep each night kind of place. Mm-hmm. And so, just get clear for yourself. What am I really comfortable with? And do I just know for a fact that, if there's going to be holes in the floor, or it's going to be made out of plywood from 30 years ago, that's just not going to work for me? That's okay. There's options. If I know that I need to have some sort of connection I need to be able to get to the Wi-Fi in a moment's notice if I need to, hey, totally fine. Just get clear with yourself, because then that will help you kind of narrow down a bit more. Okay, what level of distance am I willing to get from the comfort of my own space here and now in this comfortable Western world? And then once you kind of have those ideas, I have an idea of why I'm going, and I feel pretty confident I know the level of tolerance I have for stepping outside of my comfort zone. Okay, now we can start to kind of explore and dig in a bit more. I think the best resource that's available for anybody is, first and foremost, trusted friends and loved ones who have experienced this for themselves. If you know people, or you know people who may know people who can speak from real firsthand experience, that's a good indicator. That's a good place to start. Or maybe even if it's not somebody that you know, but it's maybe someone that you have developed a sense of trust with over time. Maybe someone who does a podcast that you really like, or maybe some source of reliable, consistent feedback that you've been engaging with. Start there. What is their experience? Where have they seemed to have experienced some success or some positive experience in a center or with a particular practitioner? Gather some data first. And another would be to really, if you get to the place where you want to reach out, maybe contact the center or the practitioner. Some really good questions to ask, particularly if if you're looking to go to a ceremony in the States or work somewhere. If you're going to go to a retreat center somewhere, I mean, it's pretty localized, and you'll be able to get, there's a number of different review sites and whatnot that you can kind of scroll through, and they're as good as any other kind of review site. You're going to see all different types of reviews, some of them more legit than not. But get a little background, do a little history on this place, like what seems to be their approach to the practice. Is this a traditional, like steeped in the tradition? We're talking ayahuasca in particular here, but it's the same idea for other offerings. Like, is this a center that has clear roots to a tradition, that is honoring and respectful and paying reverence to a tradition? Not to say that the tradition is infallible, but is there some sense of connectivity to where the medicine's coming from?
And having a tradition is like having established guidelines or parameters of practice, things like that.
Right. It's demonstrating, I think, a good way to tell is, do the claims and the promises that this center or this practitioner is making truly seem a little too good to be true? We mentioned it earlier. I think it's a pretty clear red flag if a practitioner or a center claims to be able to cure anything. If they say, we will cure you of, I think that's a good moment to close that window out.
Yeah.
And Google search something else.
Yeah.
Because the truth is that any practitioner, any curandero or curandera with like a true sense of humility will not claim to be able to cure or solve or fix. I think someone who has that level of humility and respect for this practice and for this medicine will be able to will say in truth that they can facilitate the opportunity. They can create a container that is safe. They can create a opportunity that is available and real for the individual to go and have the experiences of healing and insight and wisdom to help them on their journey. They're not the ones that are going to do or fix or cure anything. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that are creating the space through the dedication to their practice.
Yeah.
Through the center, whatever the case may be.
You mentioned humility, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge one. And not everybody can do this, but when you look into someone's eyes, sometimes you can tell a lot
Sure.
about them. And I've heard that that's a really good way to at least go about it if you can. Mm-hmm. You can't always get into the same space, especially if you're booking a trip, flying to South America,
Yeah.
and then traveling deep into the jungle, and then you meet the person. Mm-hmm. You can still say no at that point.
Yeah. Another thing, just kind of on the same topic, is fully understanding that in some circumstances, somebody just may really, it may be such a sense of urgency. I gotta get there. I gotta get there yesterday. Like, I need to go. And, if that's the place a person's in, that's a place a person's in. I think it's especially if you're going for the first time or you're going somewhere new, it is best to be thoughtful, be discerning, be methodical, remove urgency as much as possible. And just, I had the inspiration that I need to go to the jungle, and I looked on my phone and it was 11:11, and then the first center I saw was this, and it has my ex-partner's name, and this has got to be it. I got to go. I'm going to book right now. It's like, okay, that's a way. I think it is
part of the ceremony, right?
It's all part of the ceremony. Yeah. No. A person will set themselves up for a greater level of sustained success if they allow this to allow themselves to move towards it intentionally, like with discernment. Take your time, do some research. Mm-hmm. Another really good indicator is how available is the practitioner or the center, how available are they to answer questions, to help you feel prepared, to provide information. If a practitioner just invites you to the ceremony and takes your money, and you show up on that Friday, and that's the first time that you've had any conversation with them of any kind, that's a red flag.
Yeah. A green flag I thought of earlier is that in addition to humility, you want to be able to gauge that the practitioner or the shaman has a respect for the medicine, mm-hmm. and sees it as something sacred.
Yeah.
That's extremely important, because if anybody can go sell mushrooms on the street, but mm-hmm. they might not have the respect that it takes to transfer something like that.
Yeah.
And did you have a thought you wanted to finish? Because I have kind of a different direction to go. Okay. So I was looking up something that I've been familiar with for a long time, but I've never looked into it. It's the Santo Daime religion. And what it is basically it's a church or a recognized religion that has the authorized legal use of ayahuasca as a sacrament. And they claim to be a Christian church, which I know full well that that's not the case, but mm-hmm. but that's what they're operating on. And one thing that they said that was a red flag for me was that if you come to this, you have to drink. Mm. And you can't sit and be a part of the singing and the church and the ceremony unless you drink. Mm-hmm. That was something to me that's like, oh, nope. So I'm curious with you and the circles you've been in, or the places you've sat to drink, is it common for people to say, no, you can't come here unless you drink? Can people sit and can they watch? Can they be a part of it without drinking?
Mm-hmm. 100% they can be part of it without drinking. And in many Shipibo traditions or dimensions of the Shipibo tradition, 100% a person doesn't need to drink. And in reality, in many of the Shipibo lineages going way back, the pasajeros, the recipients, didn't drink at all. It was the shamans, it was the curanderos and curanderas that drank. And the pasajero, the person receiving the healing was the one from in that conscious, sober state receiving the medicine from the shaman. So absolutely, and I would agree, that sounds like a pretty strong red flag to me if it is a requirement that you have to put yourself into an altered state in order to be a part of the experience. One thing that in my experience and what I've seen and in the ways that I've experienced that, it is not about the altered state. It is about the being in a place of openness, connectivity, and receptivity. Can you be in this space with honor and reverence to the sacred that we're experiencing here? Yeah. A person can do that completely sober as well as they can under the effect of the medicine.
Yeah. So often people seem to put it on a pedestal that it's about what you saw and what you experienced, where you went. Mm-hmm. And I get it. It's pretty incredible, some mm-hmm. of it. Mm-hmm. but yeah, I don't want that to take away from the connectivity piece of it. I was going to ask you, you mentioned that long ago in the Shipibo tradition, the maestro, or basically the doctor, the plant doctor, would drink the brew and then tend to a person who needs some sort of medical attention or healing or spiritual, how would you say it, spiritual medical attention?
Sure, yeah, just medicine of all kinds.
How I'm wondering, is that placebo for the person because they believe that they can be healed, or is it, how does that possibly work that I drink ayahuasca and then I can operate on you who has had nothing?
Well, I think this is kind of the evidence of the sacred, evidence of the mystical that is real in our experience, in our lives. Whatever it takes to get us to that place, to be open enough to the idea that there is actual healing that is happening in this space. I think the scenario you describe is a really good one, because like you said, we have one person who is on the receiving end under no perceived effect, right? And then the curandero or the curandera connected in that altered state. And in the Shipibo tradition, an essential element of the ceremony experience is the songs. It's the singing that the maestro or maestra is engaged in that is, in a way, like the transmission of that healing energy. That is the plant's medicine coming through that song, right? And there's all this research that's available now that demonstrates that there's something happening there on some level, whether it's kind of the vibrational effect of the voice and the song and whatever is being transmitted through that experience, whether it is the altered state. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that music creates an altered state, and I would agree. Is it this, something's happening. And I really, I forget where I read it, but this idea that placebo, it has a connotation as just being like fake, or
like the imagination.
It's like you're making yourself believe that you got healed. No. Placebo, on the one hand, it demonstrates our body's capacity to receive healing in more ways than we can ever understand. And number two, a real component of the placebo effect has to do with a person feel like they're being taken care of. Moving into a hospital setting, and you got this doctor who is running this trial, and they've got two patients. They give one the real medicine, the other person the placebo, but treats them both the same, asking them how they're doing, learning about their conditions, offering relevant feedback, engaging in that relationship. The person receiving the placebo, they are receiving the care and attention of that professional, of that trained medicine person, the same way as the person receiving the actual chemical medicine. So that's a real effect of the placebo, is the response to feel like you're being taken care of.
I had no idea that was a part of it. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And that's all happening, in the Shipibo experience with the song, whether or not you're under the effect.
You're being cared for.
You're being cared for. Yeah.
And a third thing to add on to that is the placebo effect has to be factored into certain scientific studies every time. Otherwise, the results of the study are inconclusive.
Sure. It's like the control. You need like a baseline to be able to kind of bounce off any sort of state change, or what's the difference here. If you don't have kind of a starting point or a control, it's tough to see how much something has, or maybe impossible to see how much something has changed by the effect of whatever it is that you're studying.
Yeah, I think what you said about, as soon as you mentioned singing, it brought me back to what I had said at the beginning of like, oh, okay, well, there's so many times when I can be be in a bad state and go turn on certain music or
Yeah.
some music and just feel better.
Yeah.
And I imagine that if I have somebody who's sitting there taking into account my heartache or my ailments or having some sort of legitimate, tangible compassion for my experience, and then they sing to me through that compassion, that can be medicine. That makes so much sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
And this is what really makes the Shipibo tradition and the Shipibo songs, the Ikaros, as they're called in the Shipibo language, as far as that I've been exposed to and my understanding and experience of it myself, what really makes the Shipibo Ikaros really unique is that they are medicine songs. What you just described is a medicine song. It is medicine for you. Changes. It results in some form of altered state towards greater health and wholeness, right? That's medicine. In the Shipibo Ikaro, it isn't so much as in a song as we would normally think of, with like a beginning, middle, and end, and then repeat the coda and whatever, or there's something, it's a repeatable experience. The lyrics are, set. Many of the Shipibo Ikaros, if you were to literally translate the Ikaros into English, what they would often be saying are things like, now I am opening up the worlds of ayahuasca. I'm connecting myself to ayahuasca to bring this medicine in. I'm connecting to you. I'm cleaning your heart. I know that there is something dark there. I take that out. Or I see sadness. Or it's very like call and response. It's very in the moment. That curandero or curandera is singing to what it is they're experiencing in that moment. So in that respect, like the same Ikaro is never sung twice, because it is responding and interacting to what is happening right there and then. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, if you were to go and sit in front of a Shipibo medicine person and they have, they engage into their experience, and you have your intention, why am I here? I'm looking for this either healing or this experience. That's creating this bridge of connection and relationship that's taking place right there. And through that is where the mystical occurs. That is where the medicine is being transmitted from the shaman to you. And then the shaman, with their years of and generations of experience and years of practice and connection to these plants, has become a vessel, a vector through which this healing is being transmitted through. And they're saying what it is that they're seeing and bringing this experience in the present moment. Then you on the receiving end, it's like you don't even need to know what they're saying. You don't need to be able to speak Shipibo. It is the real lived bodily experience.
Yeah, it's more about the tonality and the truth of what's being spoken to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Than the actual translation of it. Mm-hmm. Like I hear music in different languages sometimes, and it hits me. I don't know what they're saying, but it's like, whoa,
right.
That's powerful, because you can sense a lot through sound.
Totally. And yeah, and when we have those opportunities to kind of turn off the logic mind and the translator and kind of get lost in that intellectual headspace of, oh, what is this? What does that mean? Is that the right word I would use? I don't know if I'd use that, or that's whatever. Just turn all that off and just be receptive to the vibration, to the sound, the tone, the experience that the body is receiving in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, the Shipibo, is that the oldest known tradition of, or the oldest continuing generations of ayahuasca practitioner?
That I don't know. It is old.
Or practice, I mean.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. And I guess for you, what was the first time that you had an experience with ayahuasca like?
Woo. Well, yeah, I was aware of ayahuasca. I'd heard about it and read about it, but I did not have a very strong pull towards it. And a big part of that was I was reluctant from a perspective of, I don't, this isn't my culture. I don't want to be another big dumb gringo, stomping down to the jungle and whatever, trying to have this experience of something that I can't relate to. You know, I was very painfully aware of cultural appropriation and not wanting to engage in it. So it took a long time. But, you know, this was when I was in South Carolina and I was teaching both group and private shamanic journey classes and workshops. And a person who I'd become friendly with, who had attended a lot of the workshops, and just a really sweet soul, finally just one day pulled me aside and she was like, "You ever heard of ayahuasca?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've heard of it." She's like, I think you would really benefit from trying it. And it was something about that person. You know, I was like, oh, okay, you know what? But this person knows me, and I really respect and value this person's opinion. So that was kind of like spirit kind of giving me a little nudge to go and go for it. And I went into the retreat. It was a weekend retreat. It was 4 nights, 5 days, 4 nights. Really very timid about, very self-conscious, very anxious, not knowing what to expect. And the first night, you know, I was one of the really beneficial parts of that was, again, up until that point, it was a very solitary experience for myself of the shamanic practice. You know, I'd watched videos or whatever, or read books and this and that, but to actually participate in a traditional ceremony of any kind, up to that point, I hadn't been exposed to a lot of that.
And how old were you then?
Oh, this was 10 years ago now, so 32.
Okay, so up till this point, you've been practicing different forms of shamanic activity without anything like this.
Correct.
For 15, 20,
about 15
17 years?
Yeah, 17 years. So that in and of itself was that was a huge kind of breakthrough moment. But really what it was for me was I had heard all the stories. I had heard all of the, DMT is going to open up the dimensions, and ayahuasca, you're going to see the rainbow serpent and the jaguar and all these very fantastical stories. And it was kind of one and the same. I was like, but that just seems so far out. I don't know if that is really what my experience is. And also, boy, that'd be awesome. I'd really like to. I'd be down for that.
Yeah.
To see like the Crystal Palaces or whatever. I'm in. So that kind of ambivalent place. But I was there for 4 nights. The first night, nothing, like nothing at all.
That's kind of how my first night was.
Yep. Yeah. It was just very. It wasn't even like a minor shift in perception. It was just nothing, in the dark, hearing these weird sounds and people throwing up. And then the second night, again, nothing at all, up until the very, very, very end. And I had like this one bit of experience where I was like, okay, this feels this feels different. This feels altered. That was it. And at that point, I was starting to getting a little impatient, a little frustrated. Like, man, I built this up. I knew nothing was going to happen. Like, this was it. And but then the third night, we had a perceived effect, a very strong perceived effect, and it was, whoa. This is, it was a really full-on visual experience, but it also felt like really affirming. At no point in that night was I overwhelmed or feeling like, oh, am I going to lose my mind? Am I never going to come back? It was more a feeling of like, we have totally exceeded my known level of what consciousness is capable of. Like, we blew through that ceiling, and just, this is, wow, the potential that's available to us. Amazing, And then the fourth night, similar, really strong, starting to, even in that first experience, knowing absolutely nothing, was like, wow, there's something going on with these songs. These aren't just songs. Like something's happening here.
You didn't know about the Icaros
Nope.
prior to the experience.
I mean, I knew of the songs and kind of their traditional. I knew that from what I'd read in books or heard in podcasts, but I was actually experiencing it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
being like, yo, this is something. And at the end of the night, there was this very, very deep feeling of melancholy. More like this second, 2/3 of the way through, I started to become overwhelmed with this feeling of melancholy and sadness because this weekend was coming to an end. Like, whoa, this has been such an incredible experience, and now it's almost over. And I'm going to have to go back home. And what is that? I'm going to go back to work on Monday, go grocery shopping. Like, what? You know, it was very much that feeling of coming back from it was like Frodo back at the Shire. Being like,
Lame.
I'm just supposed to just sit here and
Grow a garden.
just grow a garden, you know, and that feeling of loneliness that was very, very strong, was it reawakened the awareness of that loneliness I felt when I was a kid, like that emptiness. It was almost like this first experience with ayahuasca is what reminded me of that longing I had for some sort of connection to the divine. And there it was, just like you said, with the dials, just turned all the way up. And remembering what that was like. And then, feeling 5-year-olds have big feels. They feel everything big. And there I was, 20-something years later, feeling that again at that intensity and just the anguish that I was like, it is this feeling of loneliness and just being alone. And now I'm going to leave this experience. I don't know when I'm going to come back. I don't know how this works. I mean, do you guys do this every weekend? Do I got to go to, nothing? I had no context or no idea of where I was going to go. And then it was just this very, very pure prayer that I had just opened myself up to ayahuasca, to God, to say, it's good timing on the thunder right there.
Yeah.
To say, please help me. This is bigger than me.
Yeah.
And there was this, again, talking about connection to the conscious intelligence. I connected to that intelligence of ayahuasca. And I could really feel this being, this intelligence, this consciousness, who responded to me in that place, responded directly. It wasn't through words. She didn't show up in this long flowing gown. It was just a pure connection to this consciousness outside of myself, in which it said, I've never left. I've been with you since the beginning, And in that moment, I had this whole spiral of memories come out about, shamanism and how I was introduced to all of this and being out in nature when I was a kid and really seeing this experience, this ceremony that I'm in right now when I'm 32 has been 32 years in the making, And that's, kind of, I left the ceremony understanding for the first time, this is what a spiritual practice affords oneself to explore, those holes, those places of emptiness.
So did you end up walking away from those 4 nights with that emptiness, or did that answered prayer resolve that in that time?
Didn't resolve it in the time, but it offered a path forward.
Did that path require you to drink more ayahuasca?
It circled back around for sure. But one of the beautiful things that kind of ties in with that, the medicine showing me that my path had been walking towards this all along, was that all those years of shamanic journeying and dream work, all those things I was doing for 18 years outside of an entheogen, had primed me, really kind of made these tools available to engage into these non-ordinary states of consciousness. So I was able to then, like after this experience in this super ultra expanded state of consciousness, come back and have like a renewed passion for the shamanic journey, for the dream work, and developing that relationship, you know? So it certainly wasn't like I left that weekend and was like, when can I go back? I was like, I need some time. We got to digest this. And thank goodness that I have some tools. And that's really how those two parts kind of started to integrate. You know, the basic core shamanic practices I had been cultivating over 15 years, and now the introduction to this consciousness of plant medicine, of ayahuasca.
And this might sound like a silly question, but how do you know that it's the consciousness of the plant answering that question or that prayer?
Well, I'll give you a boring answer first. It doesn't matter. You know, what is the impact? What is the change that it affects? If I allow myself to kind of receive this message or this understanding, does it affect a change of perception? Does it offer a new perspective?
Yeah.
And does that perspective lead me to a greater sense of wholeness and wanting to move towards a healthier path of life?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a yes, hey, whatever, wherever it comes from. But I think that the question is an important one, because this kind of trends into an area that I think is really fascinating to look at some of these experiences, the lens through which we kind of look at them. You know, are we just exploring parts of self? Or are we truly engaging with, a consciousness outside of us? And I think in many ways, some of those really meaningful and sea-changing experiences, it's one thing to say like, yeah, it was in me this whole time, or I've always known that to be true. You know, Dorothy always knew how to get back to Kansas. But sometimes we need that truth externalized. We need it to come from outside of us to create that level of belief and truth into it. You know, we need someone that we look up to, a mentor, a teacher, a cosmic plant deity, to deliver that message to us so that we can be available to it. Mm-hmm. You know, but to your point, when I think it's a valid one, was that actually a part of ourselves that was delivering that message? Sure. You know, is it our imagination? Are we making it all up? Of course we are. But really, how does that message then translate into real and sustained change in our life? Yeah. If it does that, then, hey, wherever it comes from, does it lead us to being in closer, more clean, clear relationship with ourselves and others, to be more present and whole in our community and our families? If the answer is yes, hey, wherever it wants to come from.
The reason I ask is people are seeing the things happening in the world. Mm-hmm. There's crazy stuff happening all over the place, and they don't know what to think of it. So they're trying to figure out, well, what's happening? Why is it happening? How does this factor into what I believe, or how does what I believe factor into what I see happening? And so people are looking for answers, and I know that, at least for myself, going down that path of using psychedelics, trying to answer questions, it was multifaceted. Oftentimes I would answer some questions, and then other ones would just be like, oh, this is even more confusing now. So how does one's spiritual belief play a part in entering into a psychedelic journey? And kind of going back to the Santo Daime thing, saying like, okay, well, we're Christians. Well, no, you're not.
Right.
But So I guess, if somebody has a certain spiritual belief, practice, and then enters into that journey, I know it can be many different things, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of different angles there. One, I think, a spiritual practice, my opinion, a spiritual practice that has actual meaningful foundational support in a person's life is, like we said earlier, one that leads to greater connection, not less. A spiritual practice that allows one to be more present and rooted and grounded in their experience of this life. That's really a key component of a healthy, vibrant, sustaining spiritual practice. So, I would say if a person's spiritual practice has left them feeling disconnected or separated, or like we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, I would highly review your spiritual practice before you start throwing in powerful psychedelics into the mix. Maybe just kind of straighten that out a bit more. So, okay, now we step into a psychedelic or an entheogenic experience. It can be a really beautiful opportunity to strengthen, push the edges, push the limits of that person's spiritual container a little bit, because not one that's so brittle that it's going to crack under the weight of some new paradigm shifting. If all of a sudden realize like, wow, this thing I've devoted my life to may not be the thing. Yeah, that's where a person's going to need some really dedicated, clear, clean support.
Yeah, that can be really traumatizing for
Very
somebody.
Traumatizing. Yeah. Getting back to what we talked about earlier, like preparation and integration are just as important as participation in the ceremony. So if anybody with, deeply held spiritual beliefs is looking to go and explore the psychedelic experience, especially one done in a traditional context, terribly important to make sure that they have the opportunity to really prepare themselves for that, what can be a really foundation shaking experience. Because if that spiritual belief structure is really fragile, really brittle, it's not going to take much to bring it all down. Okay, but let's say that the person has, pretty healthy, that there's a little bit of flexibility there. They have a capacity to hold more than one truth to be true at the same time. Perhaps they have a capacity to, allow some questions to be unanswered, and they can go into this psychedelic experience. It has the potential to really offer a expanded view and deepen a level of connectedness to that sense of divinity or the mystical or the sacred. Because, it kind of reminds me of, one of the things that Joseph Campbell kind of referred to so many times in different ways is he would say words to the effect of, like, the greatest proof that God exists is all the different masks he wears to show us he's here. When we have the capacity to kind of let the spiritual foundation of our own belief system be broadened a bit, it has a way to like really sustain that expansion. But like we're saying, that's not just take 5 grams in silent darkness and see what happens.
Yeah.
It really needs to be approached with care and support and intentionality, as we've been saying through this whole conversation, is why am I doing this?
Yeah. And going back to kind of the original purpose of wanting to meet with you and do this talk is about safety. People are going to do it regardless, what to look out for. We talked about mindset a little bit. You want to have a clear intent. You want to be really clear on why you're doing what you're doing. Even if you don't have all the answers, you want to know the direction. We didn't really talk too much about set and setting And I know that those are really important factors in this type of a thing. Can you touch on those a little?
Yeah. So the way that I like to carry those two thoughts, those two topics, set and setting. Set is in a lot of senses like the mindset that one is going into. Like ready, set, go. Like getting a person in position to walk through that door into the unknown as prepared and as resourced as possible. So, set can look like making sure that like we've said before, you have support before and after. You've done some cursory tilling of the soil, of your own emotional, mental, physical landscape to prepare yourself. In the Shipibo tradition, and there's lots of other traditions that do the same thing. There is, a preparatory period before the ceremony where one wants to engage in some cleansing, some physical cleansing, whether that's diet restrictions or fasting or whatever the case may be. Getting yourself set so that when you cross over and you go into the ceremonial experience, or you go down into the jungle, a completely different environment, you have prepared yourself a little bit. If somebody wants to go climb Mount Everest, they're going to do some hiking on the bunny slopes a few times before they go. Setting is the environment that you're in. Does the environment feel safe? Do you feel like the environment is one that is preparing you and supporting you through this experience? So that's not just the physical environment. If you're down in a retreat center, do you feel like the place is well maintained and that your physical well-being is, top of mind for the people there? Do you have the necessary tools and items for you to be able to proceed in a place of relative comfort? Not going to be in a Chase lounge or anything, but can you at least feel that you have found yourself into a place that you can be available to the experience and not wondering, is somebody going to trip over me, or do I even know where the restroom is? Allow the setting of your experience to be one that invites and sustains the experience of healing, whatever that means for you. Okay. And then, another piece of that is how does one allow for safe and gentle landing to the best of one's ability? We mentioned earlier, a person can have a really kind of rocky experience that extends beyond the weekend. So it's a good idea to make sure that your living space is one that is warm and inviting for you to come home to. A really good friend and teacher of mine who I've known for many, many years says the first thing to do when you're preparing for a ceremony is to do your dishes, to make your bed, fold the laundry, take care of the things in your environment.
Which kind of harkens back to this whole thing's a ceremony anyway.
Right.
So you might as well be doing that all the time to take care of yourself for whatever is outside of your house.
That's not a bad idea. So yeah, set and setting, kind of to recap, as in my experience and as I perceive it, is, set is how am I conditioning myself for this experience. Setting is how is my conditioning my environment for the experience.
Cool. Thank you. We also talked a little bit about how to choose your shaman, the humility, the red flags, things like that. What are some things to avoid other than the obvious we talked about with the setting? If it's, if it looks dirty or uncomfortable or whatever, obviously avoid that. But anything that comes to mind that you can think of as another red flag, something to avoid?
Well, things to avoid.
More interpersonal, more social.
Yeah. It's really important to ensure that the people who are providing the experience, someone is going down to experience these traditional medicines or a psychedelic and theogenic experience of any kind, there's an agreement that is being made there. I'm coming down here to receive the healing capacity of this medicine, whatever it is, or the connective capacity of this experience. And I'm coming to you, curandera, practitioner, because you have a level of experience in this particular medicine or in this tradition to cultivate and offer this experience. Like that's the agreement we're making here. And I'm going to be able to do so in a way that I feel safe and supported. And you're going to provide a space where I can come and experience this. So, I think the first thing is to ensure that agreement feels true. And this is where you could do a little research, ask some questions. One of the things I feel is very important to know about the person who is offering this is, what is your background? What's your experience? Like, how long have you been doing this? And if you are purporting to be offering this medicine in connection to a traditional culture, or this medicine coming from traditional practices, are you connected to that? I think it's a good question to ask a shaman. Where do you go when you need help? How often are you continuing to learn and study? And, if this is a Shipibo practitioner, it's like, how often do you diet? How often do you engage in the own practices that you're here to offer? And it's not to, create a sense of like, I got to see your resume, although sometimes, that's important information. But it's also just as important to observe how they respond to those kinds of questions.
Yeah, that seems to be a big one.
Getting back to that humility piece again,
Yeah, I had an experience with a gentleman who didn't want me to speak with the practitioner directly. He wanted to be the go-between, and that was obviously a no-go.
Mm-hmm.
And so what if something happens during ceremony that's like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with what these people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not feeling this. I want to get out of here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had that happen yourself, or seen someone else experience that?
Oh, I've been a participant in ceremonies where somebody was having that experience, for sure.
I got to get out of here. That whole thing.
Yeah. This is, I've heard a bunch of stuff, but that is one of the things where that is something that is best treated well before the ceremony even starts. A person, it goes both ways. A person who does a little bit of research, who engages in a little bit of preparation, and has conversations with the practitioner or the facilitating group that they're working with. Hopefully, the person has a team, even if it's just one other person to help facilitate the ceremony. That's a green flag. Does this person work as a team, or are they just the one individual? They're up here, everybody else files in below. So,
so you're saying you want it to be probably non-hierarchical structure at the center you're going to. You don't want there to be obviously somebody can be in charge,
right?
But the way you moved your hands there was kind of like a pyramid. You don't want there to be one person at the top kind of dictating how everything else happens. You want it to be everybody's kind of standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, working together.
More communal, I think, is that. I wouldn't say that that's better or worse. It just I would say, in my own experience, having seen it and experienced it, those that work together there's a greater capacity that's available. And there's always going to be bad actors, 100%. More often than not. And you have, more often than not, those that work as a group, as a team, where there is support, where the curanderos and the curanderos that are practicing there, they have people that they are working together with. That is going to has the opportunity, the potential to create a greater opportunity for healing, because it's just strength in numbers. You're all working together towards a common goal. And like you said, there's going to be the maestro or maestra for sure. I mean, that is part of that teamwork structure. It's not completely everyone, all 4 members are 25% in charge. It's important to have that, but not in a...
You don't want a dictator.
A dictator, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Where are we going? What was the...
We're going along the what happens if you feel something during the experience, or I got to get out of here. I don't like what they're doing.
Right.
You encounter a bad actor mid-journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you encounter a bad actor mid-journey. I think this is why it's important, to get back to the idea of like the best way to avoid a situation like that happens way before you get to the ceremony.
So doing your homework really is...
Doing your homework. Does this center, or if you're in a retreat experience somewhere outside of a center, who are the identified people to go to for support? Who have you identified for yourself outside of this experience for support? And to really, really trust your gut. Trust that intuitive ability that we all have. If you have a bad scent or something, your stomach's turning just a little bit in these conversations, or you're just noticing something that doesn't quite feel right, this environment is not the time to override your own internal experience. Going into a psychedelic experience, that's not the time to be like, I'm sure it'll just be fine.
It'll work itself out.
It'll work out. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
But in the moment, all right, so say you do all that and something still happens. I think in the moment, the best resource that can be available in times like that is, number one, a connection to something greater. I remember I've had some really, really tough ones where I wasn't about to go running out of the room screaming, but we were close. And one of the most valuable lessons that I learned in that is that is when prayer can be more powerful than one can imagine. And even if it is, whatever capacity I have to connect to the light, to believe in something good, even if it is just the tiniest pinprick of light against a jet black sky, that is where I'm going to put all my awareness and all my attention. There is something greater than myself, and there is something good. And that is where I'm going to put my attention. And also just the true awareness that this will pass. This is a moment. And this may seem like a very long moment without end. But this moment will pass. Whatever is happening right here, and this is not, this is separate from feeling physically unsafe. If a person feels physically unsafe or something is off where their physical being is in jeopardy, you just get out. If that is the scenario, doesn't matter how many pinpricks of light you're looking for, you get yourself out of there. But it's truly like the experience of connecting into the realization that this is just a moment. If in my mind, if in my personal experience, perhaps it's overwhelming, the visions, whatever it is, the singing's too much, and I just am, holding on for dear life, that can be a very fruitful avenue,
Prayer. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Another question, I guess, would be, do you have any kind of really cool, really fun, exciting experiences that you've had that you would like to share?
Yeah, I do. Wow, where to start? Yeah, I mean, the one thing that has been like such a meaningful part of this whole journey with plant medicines and just kind of the own personal shamanic experience is like over and over and over again is the experience of like what a sense of humor the universe has, and our capacity for finding things funny that would otherwise seem like completely out of, we'd be thrown into a padded room otherwise. But one thing that kind of jumps out to me in this moment as you're asking the question, one memory that really comes back is this experience I had with, it was when I was on a diet. So I was down in the jungle. I'd been there for months at this point and really just kind of run ragged. And, you know, I'm just sitting there in my hammock day after day. And you really get into a heightened level of sensitivity at any point in the day, you know, after being in the jungle for any amount of time like that. And I had found myself just kind of stuck in this loop. And I was just reliving and remembering this experience with this one particular relationship that was really hurtful, and you know, it was just a really tough one. Brought up a lot of kind of core wounds and patterns that I wasn't even aware of, but this particular person and this relationship really brought them all up. And I was sitting down there in the jungle. You know, I'd put all this time and effort and money aside and really kind of cultivated my life to support me going down there. And here I am, all messed up about this girl. Like, man, what a waste. Like, I want to learn, like, something. And here I am, like, I'm not asking for, like, wizard stuff, but did I really come all this way just to come and be crying in my lap about this person again? Like, I was really caught up in that. And I just had to catch myself. And it was like the voice in my head and in my mind, I was just like, okay, we gotta get ourselves out of here. Like, let's just change our train of thought here. Just think of one good thing. What was the last good memory that I had? And I just sat there and I thought of something. It was something that happened like before I left for Peru. You know, I went to Sedona and hung out, you know, went on this beautiful hike and talked to the ravens. Just a really cool experience. It's like, yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. That's a good memory. Let's do it again. Let's do another one. Thought of a different memory. I was like, okay, let me just keep doing this. I would think of something and it would just kind of lift me up a little bit, and I would fall again. And I was just telling myself, okay, when's the last time you felt really connected to something, to spirit? And then I just had this memory come up that I hadn't thought of in ages. And it happened like years and years before. It was before I had even moved out to Arizona. I was still in Charleston. And I had just gotten over a really, really hard time in my life. Like one of those times where it's like I'm one or two decisions away from not having to worry about anything anymore. You know, like really at the bottom. But I got out of it. And I started to kind of get back on my feet, and I was living in South Carolina, and I used to just take these trips. I would just get in the car and drive and just end up in some weird backwoods town in the Carolinas or Georgia somewhere and just like hang, and just, it was a new place. And this one day I ended up somewhere in North Carolina, and it was this beautiful summer day, early summer, blue sky. I was at this park, and there was just families around, some dude playing a guitar over there, big lake. It was just a beautiful place. And I was like, man, how did I end up here? This is great, you know? And I just spent some time in this park. And there was a particular moment when I'm in that park, just having got through this really, really difficult time where it was the lowest that I'd ever been. And it just kind of hit me, and I was just like, man, I kind of made it. I think I made it. I made it through that time. I don't think I was going to make it, but I did. Wow. And now I'm here. I'm in this beautiful park. Like, how did this work out? Like, I think things are going to be okay, you know? And in that moment, I had this sense, like this physical sense of this, that there was somebody standing next to me. And it felt like God. Like, that was the closest experience I had to, like, feeling the presence of God in my life. And he was standing right next to me. And I was just filled with this sense of, like, I think I'm going to be okay, you know? And that was the memory that had come up when I'm there in the jungle, hungry, itchy, just trying to bring myself into a higher place. And while I'm remembering this, and I'm like seeing it, like this is a memory that I'm seeing, like displayed on a screen.
So your eyes are open?
Eyes were closed, but it
Oh,
was
okay.
just like
Okay,
in
you
my
can
mind's
see it
eye.
very vividly.
Yeah, see it real vividly. Like I'm immersed in the scene. And it dawned on me, it was like literally 2 weeks after that trip to some weird town in North Carolina. 2 weeks later is when I met that friend who introduced me to ayahuasca. And I was like, wow, that I had totally forgotten about that experience. Man, that's something. And then I just was kind of filled with this feeling like, I want to go talk to myself. You know, I had done enough shamanic journeying and worked with these medicines long enough to know that there is a real psychotherapeutic, mythopoetic component to a memory like this. I want to go engage with this memory, you know, like I would in a shamanic journey. And so I allow that visualization to come forward, and I kind of move myself in my visualization to old me way back when, and was just standing in front of myself in this park, you know, looking at myself. And I was just like, I'm so proud of you. So proud of you. You could have quit. You got close. You got real close, but you didn't. You stuck it through. And you have no idea what's coming. Like in 2 weeks, this lady's going to tell you about this thing, and you're going to go. It's going to change your life. And you're going to, now look, this is what you're going to turn into. We're here in Peru. Like, we work with this medicine. We're helping people, you know? And in my visions, I like to kind of, I like to think of myself. I like to give myself an image. I like to see myself in a way that inspires like connection and confidence and love for myself. And so I had all of my shamanic tools. I had my pipe and my flute and my mouth harp and all these things. And I was just like, check this out. Like, you're going to be doing this and you don't even know it. I'm so proud of you. You made it. And then it dawned on me, that being that was next to me was me now, going back. Time, space, whatever, doesn't matter. But that feeling that I had of this like benevolent power, this force that was there supporting me, was me.
Wow.
And that experience has really transformed and carried all of that. Kind of getting back to your question, what you asked before, like, is a message from ayahuasca, is that from ayahuasca or is it us? Yes. It is.
Yeah. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, cool. That's a great story. Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming up here and having this conversation with me.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts or comments or words about the whole pursuit and people going to do this thing? And
yeah, I mean, well, first, thank you, Andy, for having me. I think you're doing a great service by just allowing conversations like this, and I appreciate you inviting me to do this. And just closing thought, just kind of reiterate something that's already been said is, if there's to really do yourself the service, if you're feeling called to explore these things, to engage in psychedelic or entheogenic experiences, do yourself the service of research, of patience, of asking questions, and really engaging in some curiosity about the experience, about why you're wanting to do this, why you're feeling called. And then also to be really honest with yourself about, where's your comfort level? Where is that comfort zone, and what are you willing to kind of push through a little bit? What are you willing to step into, even if it means stepping out of something that feels really safe and secure? And gather resources, ask questions, talk to people. I offer a number of services related to this. I do integration support, and I offer, if people are interested in developing shamanic skills and practices, I offer one-on-one and group support to do that. And I'm available. If you're listening to this and you have questions, like, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help.
Where are the places people can find you for any of those services?
Sure. They can go to my website, which is originalmythology.com. and that's the best spot. It's kind of the one-stop shop for what I offer, and yeah, I'd be happy to have conversations like that. And if that's something you're feeling called to do, whether it's developing your own personal practice, expanding one that already exists, or if you're interested or pursuing work with plant medicines, then that's resources that I offer.
I feel like people would be thinking, do you offer any resources for people that use cannabis or work with cannabis in a similar capacity?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, cannabis is certainly a master plant, and I think a lot of the tools would be really similar.
Okay, so they would kind of cross over all the
For
different
sure.
plants.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's that personal shamanic practice is one that is the idea. That's the idea of it, is that it can be a foundational component from which a person can work in whatever relationships or medicines that they're working with already. It doesn't need to replace anything. It can be something that can help vitalize and expand an existing practice as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Mandy.